Hey guys, sorry I am not there today, but we're just going to do a quick introduction to kind of the new unit. So if you do not have these, you need to get it from the sub, and we are going to kind of just play around with the first 4 pages. We're going to look at a story problem, answer some questions, and then you're going to try a story problem and answer some questions too. All right, so on page 1, okay, we're going to do a story problem. We're going to make a table, we're going to make a graph, we're going to make an equation, and then we're just going to answer some questions about it. All right, so we have Mr. Mack and Miss Tolley are both taking road trips to LA, leaving near San Jose. Mr. Mack in his red Toyota started 50 miles from San Jose and drove at an average speed of 30 miles an hour. Mrs. Tolley in her blue Chevy started 10 miles from San Jose and drove at an average speed of 40 miles an hour. So basically what we're going to do, since we're talking about just 2 different cars, talking about hours and miles, we're going to basically just put this on the same graph and kind of see what happens. So first, let's start with the red car. Okay, let's start off with Mr. Mack. Mr. Mack started 50 miles from San Jose. So he started 50 miles away from San Jose. And then he drove at an average speed of 30 miles an hour. So an hour passed, he drove an additional 30 miles away from San Jose. So now he was 80 miles from San Jose. Another hour passes, he's another 30 miles away from San Jose. So I'm just going to keep adding 30 a bunch of times. So I'm going to add 30 again and again until I basically just get to the end of my table. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those ordered pairs and I'm basically just going to plot them on my graph. Okay, so we have at 0 hours, he started 50 miles away. So it looks like these are going by 10. So I'm going to start right here. Okay, after 1 hour, he was 80 miles away. 2 hours, he was 110. So I'm going to go in between. 3 hours, I was at 140. 4 hours, I was at 170. 5 hours, I was at 200. 6 hours, I was at 230. 7 hours, I was at 260. And then 8 hours, I was at 290. The last thing I am going to do is I'm going to connect all the dots with the straightest line that I can, just to say that this is continuous, and I'll put a little arrow at the end because he's still driving. We don't know where LA exactly is. All right. Next, we're going to do the blue Chevy and Miss Tolley. Miss Tolley is in her blue Chevy, and she only lived 10 miles outside of San Jose, and she drove at an average speed of 40 miles an hour. So when we think about when she started, she was 10 miles outside San Jose. Okay. Then she drove an hour and she drove an additional 40 miles. So I'm going to add 40 miles, and then she's 50 miles outside of San Jose. And then I'm just going to keep adding 40 and 40 a bunch of times. Okay. I can't do math. Can't do math. Really hard. All right. 170, 210, 250, 290, and 330. All right, now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to plot all of my ordered pairs for the blue car on the same graph because we're just talking about the same thing, just 2 different cars. Now this car started 10 miles away from San Jose, so I'm going to put a little dot right there. At 1 hour, she was 50 miles outside San Jose. 2 hours, 90. 3 hours, 130. 4 hours, 170. 5 hours, 210. 6 hours, 250. 7 hours, 290. And it looks like I can't do the 330, which is fine. Then I'm again just going to connect those dots with a straight line. All right, the last thing I'm going to do on this front page is basically just write my equations. We've been doing this, so this hopefully shouldn't be too hard. Okay, going back to Mr. Mack's car, he started 50 miles away. So that's my starting point, my y-intercept. And he increased, he was going 30 miles an hour, and that was my rate, that was my speed, my pattern. So my equation is, okay, miles equals 30 30 miles an hour plus the 50 that he started off with. Now you're going to go ahead and you're going to try to write Miss Tolley's real quick. All right, for Miss Tolley, okay, she went 40 miles an hour and started 10 miles outside of San Jose. Okay, so you should have all of this filled out. And now we're just going to answer some questions on the back on page 2. Okay, even though we are not sure how far LA is from San Jose, how can we tell who will get to LA first and how do we know? Well, it kind of just depends on where LA is. So I'm just going to kind of talk about a few instances. Again, you don't have to really draw anything. So let's say that LA's right here, 100 miles away from San Jose. I can look and I can see that the red car gets there faster because it took less time. Okay. But then maybe it takes 300 miles. When I look at 300 miles, okay, it looks like the blue car is there quicker and faster. Okay, so it kind of just depends on where exactly it is. So what we can look for is kind of who is in the lead. Okay, we can look on who is in the lead. After hours, we could look on the graph. It kind of just depends on what's going to help us the best. Okay, but what happened was there was a point where they basically were at the same point on the highway. So now this is the next question. When will the cars be right next to each other on the freeway and how can we tell? Well, when we look at the table, we can see it a couple different ways. We can look at the table and I notice that at 4 hours, they're both 170 miles outside of San Jose. I also can see it from the graph because at this point right here, they're literally on top of each other and they're on the same point and they kind of intersect, they cross over each other. So when they ask, when will their cars be right next to each other? It'll be after 4 hours. Okay. And you could look at the table or you could look at the graph. Sorry, my dogs use bells when they want to go outside. So, all right, the next question is how far from San Jose will they be when they're right next to each other? So when we look at this, I can see 4 hours, and I can see that they're both 170 miles away. I can also see this in the ordered pair, 4 hours, 170 miles away. So they will both be 170 miles outside of San Jose, when they are right next to each other on the highway. Okay. The final thing we're going to ask ourselves is, well, how could we do this without a graph, without a table, and just using our equation? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the first equation. So the first equation was, hey, this person started 50 miles away and he went at a rate of 30 miles an hour. Okay. Then we had the blue car, and the lovely blue car started 10 miles away and went at a rate of 40 miles an hour. And the question is, when are they going to be right next to each other? When are they going to be the same? Well, when I think of the same, I think of when are they equal to each other? And this kind of looks like an equation that we have solved before at the beginning of the school year. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to solve this equation. Okay, I'm going to move the 40x over. It's a positive, so I'm going to move it over with a negative. Okay, positive and a negative, this makes a 0. Okay, 30 with a negative 40 makes negative 10x plus 50. I'm going to drop down the 10. And again, there's more than one way to solve an equation. Now I'm going to move this 50 over with a 10. The opposite of a positive is a negative. And then a positive and a negative 50 make a 0. Drop down that negative 10x. And then I'm going to do this math problem real quick. 10 with a negative 50 is negative 40. And then the last step would be just, hey, let's divide. And we get x equals 4. Well, how does that match? Well, that matches the 4 on our hour. So this is 4 hours. Okay. Well, how could we figure out the other part? Well, let's use the red car. And let's say that, hey, we just figured out that there's 4 hours for our math problem. So I'm going to plug in 4 hours. Okay. I'm going to multiply 30 times 4 and get 120. 120 plus 50 is 170, and that matches how many miles we're at. Okay. Maybe you don't like the red car, maybe you like the blue car. So let's use the blue car. The blue car is 40x plus 10. But again, I just figured out that they intersect at 4, so I'm going to put 4 in for x. I'm going to multiply 40 and 4, get 160. 160 plus 10 is, oh my gosh, 170 miles as well. So this unit, we're going to talk about basically when are story problems the same and how we can solve them using equations, we can use graphing, but this is just the basic idea. All right. So what you guys are going to do is you guys are going to try this problem right here. You're going to do Goofus and you're going to do Gallant. All right. And then what you're going to do is we're going to kind of talk about how these are a little bit different. How these questions, like how we can answer these questions. Okay. So that's what you guys are going to do today. You're going to try this on your own and then you're going to check with the sub. And then there's just going to be some Delta math for you to complete. Have a good day and I'll see you on Monday.